preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
I see familiar faces. I'm delighted to welcome you back. I'm delighted to welcome those whom I don't know, and I hope that you'll be frequent guests. As Beth mentioned, this is the first of this season. It's our third year, and we're very fortunate because tonight we have Alan Eisler, who is, I guess, well known for The Prince of West End Avenue. I also read Clerical Errors that I enjoyed very much. I would like to give you a brief biographical sketch, but I'm going to read it straight from the book. The edition that I have says, Alan Eisler was born in London and came to America. He has a 6-year-old grandson. He's really quite young. And came to America as a young man. He taught English literature in New York City for 25 years. His first novel, The Prince of West End Avenue, won the 1994 National Jewish Book Award and was one of the 5 fiction finalists for the National Book Critics Circle Award. His second novel, Craven Images, was published in 1996. The Bacon Fancier, 4 Tales, appeared in 1997. He now lives in London. It's not true. I'm glad to say that he is with us and lives in New York, and he has a terribly, terribly intimidating British accent.
So watch out.
Here's what I would like to do. I'm going to offer you, with your permission, my reading of the book. And then I'd like to invite you to jump in with yours. So in The Bacon Fancier, we have a sort of a bird's eye view of Jewish history. And in particular, a kind of wry look at how the Jew has made his way in a Gentile world and how he has survived. These are 4 novellas, and in these 4 novellas, we travel with various heroes from Venice of the 17th century to England, 1790s, then through a transatlantic crossing to of the late 19th century to post-World War II New York. The book is, I think, full of brilliant references and inversions that are sort of playful and tease us with all kinds of wonderful hidden meanings. And we're going to try to decode some of them with your help. The first novella, entitled The Monster, we find ourselves behind the walls of Shylock's Venetian ghetto. Here the narrator is unnamed, but we know that he's a financier with a suit pending against a Venetian merchant by the name of Antonio Bassanio. And we are, of course, in the world of Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. But unlike Shakespeare's Shylock, our hero learns from the Gentile world. And although he loses his case initially, on retrial, on appeal, he hires their lawyer and he beats them at their own game. I kind of took this as a comment on the ability of the Jew to adapt to the Gentile world. And I wonder what you think of it. Is that kind of necessary for survival?
Well, adapt, I suppose, really means survival and little more than that. His story is not a happy one, and that story does not, in any case, end particularly happily. The figure, the golem-like figure, who is the defender of the Jews, is killed by a mere boy with a slingshot. So while what you say is true, I think it needs modifying. It's not a victory ever. What it is an ability to survive. Mm-hmm. 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 I think.
Well, The Monster is also a story about conversions.
Yes.
And I suppose, in some sense, that's another way of survival. At least the merchant, who we know was born a Jew, in fact, his name was originally Asher Bassan, converted to facilitate his entry into Gentile society and also, I guess, Gentile commerce. Another convert, who was the narrator's brother, was abducted as a child and forced to convert. He then became a high official of the church. And I understand that that has some historical accuracy. And
yes.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about
that. Simply that the House of the Catechumens in Venice and other such institutions in other major Italian cities at the time, they were notorious for abducting Jewish children and simply by passing some holy water over them, dripping some holy water over them, claiming that they were now Catholics, and the Jewish parents could do nothing about it. And it happened again and again. And there are many such cases on record. I mean, there are some very famous cases on record, but there are numerous studies of the Jews of Venice that are consulted while writing that story. Give example after example of it. There's nothing extraordinary in it. It's just shocking that it could be, but it could be in that way right into the 19th century. It's not as if it it stopped at the 17th by any means. It was still happening in the 19th century.
The title character, Mostrino, is, as you mentioned, is, I guess, a kind of a parody of the Golem of Prague. He's a foundling, and gives you the occasion, I guess, to demonstrate this Jewish communal responsibility, because they take him in and they rear him and he becomes devoted to them. What is his role in this Venetian story?
Well, one really likes one's readers to come up with the answers to questions of that sort. For me, there was a particular irony in this figure who, I mean, the learned rabbis see him as a baby. He's only got 3 fingers on one hand, and they see that as a letter shin. And not only that, he's born without a penile sheath. It's as if he's born circumcised. Clearly, this is an extraordinary figure. Perhaps he will lead the Jews back to the Holy Land. On the other hand, these are pretty wise guys, these rabbis, and they know there are lots of foundlings in the ghetto, and perhaps this is a foundling, and perhaps it's worse yet, it might be a Christian. And then what if it comes to the ears of the Christians that the Jews are bringing up a Jewish child? For me, though, I liked, at the end of the story, the inversion of a Christian David slaying a Jewish Goliath. There was for me a kind of irony in that was pleasing. I like that sort of inversion.
And your book is full of them. But
yeah.
I'll go out on a limb and I'll tell you some of my thoughts.
Yes.
First of all, I was interested in the fact that he was born covenanted, so to speak. But at the same time, he's deformed. Now, you say 3 fingers, shin, right, but he is deformed. Yeah. And so I asked myself, are you saying something about the natural condition of the Jew?
I hope not. No, about such things, I don't really like to comment. I mean, I think a story, once it's left my hands, once it's in print, it's fair game. It doesn't matter what I intended. It really doesn't. If one supposed that we were to come upon a manuscript that was authenticated as absolutely and certainly written by William Shakespeare, unquestionably by Shakespeare, and in it he said, in the play Hamlet, I intended to expose corruption on the waterfront in 16th century Denmark. We would have to say that he failed in his intent, but he had nevertheless produced an absolutely superb play. Now, I don't want to make a comparison between myself and Shakespeare, but I think the principle holds. And I think that if my story is saying that, and you can demonstrate by reference to its parts that it is indeed saying that, then I will acknowledge that it says that.
What would you make of it?
I would be amazed at my skill and erudition and so forth.
Well, did it strike anyone else in a similar vein, sir?
I wonder if this whole thing of the stealing Jewish child and baptizing him was influenced at all by the recent controversy over this priest who, this figure in Catholic history who kidnapped a Jewish child in Rome and is now up for sainthood.
Oh, the Mortora case? Is that the Mortora case?
Yeah.
I don't know that it's necessarily influenced by that in particular, but that certainly, as an example, would have been in the background of it. Yes, I think so.
Before we move on, any other comments? You weren't struck by the deformity. Go ahead, please.
Deformity bothered me, but my reading, even in that story with everything going on, is would the characters be different if he wasn't Jewish? And that ran through several of them. Somebody born with a deformity taken on. Is this supposed to be unique for a Jewish community and did they take him on more because he was deformed?
Well, I think that the answer to that is a question of whether you read only on a literal level or whether you consider possible symbolic or metaphoric meanings. If we see the Jew as deformed, or rather if the world sees the Jew as deformed, then he can well be represented by such a figure. I mean, there is deformity in the Jew in the story that follows as well.
Exactly.
I think that what pleased me about that deformed figure is that he was so gentle a person. He was so ugly to look upon, and yet he was so friendly. The children loved him. He played with a cudgel. That was his only toy. I mean, I tried, obviously, as best I could. You have to understand, I've just gone back to this book. It's now 6 years since I last read it. So I've got certain things are now clear in my mind, which I hadn't really thought about, I don't think, before. But I obviously went to great lengths to make him as gentle and pleasant a person as possible, but ugly in the eyes of the world. A deformed creature. And I think it may be that the world has looked upon the Jews in such ways.
I'm asking.
Yeah. Well, I think that, I hope that's what I intended, because I think that's what I've done.
And then in a reversal of another stereotype about Jews, he is really devoid of intelligence.
Yes, he is. He has, of course, a moment, or what may be a moment of intelligence just before he dies.
Before he charges.
No, when the stone hits him in the forehead.
Oh, yes.
There's a look of sudden intelligence just before he crumples and falls.
I wonder, why is he destroyed? I mean, we know why
Because
the Golem of Prague was destroyed.
Yeah.
But
he was not really a golem after all.
Right.
You know, he was a foundling. It was my Shylock figure who told the Christian in the ghetto that this was a defender of the Jews, made by our brethren in Prague to defend us. Well, in a sense, he was the defender of the Jews, and I suppose, in my pessimistic and cynical way, he therefore had to be destroyed.
as a defender of the Jews? Explain.
Well, I just think that the Jews have the history of the Jews has demonstrated over the centuries that they are to be destroyed. There is no possibility of preservation, or there has not been until maybe the present time. I hesitate to comment on that, but certainly the story of the Jews has been one of destruction, immolation, all kinds of horrible ways to die. So this fellow, who is the defender of the Jews, it seemed to me, had necessarily to. He certainly couldn't defend the Jews. So off he went.
If Shylock the Usurer is, of course, a Gentile stereotype, but you create another wonderful one in this Englishman abroad with a mad dog, no less.
Yes, the mad dog belonged to a rabbi.
Right. But the image of this mad dog attacking this Englishman.
Name was Frankfurt. The dog's name was Frankfurt.
Right.
It was named after the hometown of his owner, who disappeared somewhere in Italy.
So this Englishman character.
He's a real man.
He's a real man.
Oh, absolutely. Tom Corriott visited. In fact, this is really the actual, if you want to know, the kernel, the seed of the story. Tom Corriott was one of the figures that I came across in my other life when I was an academic, and thought that the literature of the 16th century was the only literature that there was. In any case, he visited the ghetto in Venice in the 17th century, and some of the language that I give to him actually comes right out of his journals, out of his report of his visit. He actually was a very sympathetic visitor. He commented on the cleanliness of the Jews in the ghetto, the beauty of the women, lots of kind things to say. But I wanted a buffoon, so I turned him into a buffoon. And it is true that he had, well, at least if he's telling the truth in his writings, he had a disputation with what he called a learned rabbin on the streets of the ghetto. So just to get back to where I started. So Tom Corriott then became, for me, he sort of stimulated in me that I asked myself, what if one of those Jews that he encountered in Venice had been Shylock? What if? Now, once I just asked myself, what if, I then had a story to write, you see. And so I wrote it. That's how it came about. So he's not minor. Without him, there wouldn't have been. Also, as you did point out, and it is, I don't name him. I don't name Shylock. That is.
Yet when the book was published, there was a review in the New York Times, and the reviewer said, Eisler, quote, rewrites the story of Shylock as a tart critique of Shakespeare.
Well, I wouldn't.
What do you think he meant, and do you agree or disagree?
Well, of course I disagree. Where would I come off critiquing Shakespeare?
Oh, for heaven's sake, why not?
I wouldn't dream of it. No, I wouldn't dream of it. That's not it at all. The story is an unhappy story, and as one, I taught it. I taught the Merchant of Venice year after year when I was an academic, and it was always problematic. The way it has been produced, apart from Nazi Germany, of course, in England certainly, and in the United States, since the middle of the 19th century, has always been with a sort of a sympathetic view toward Shylock, and it was my job, at least I so conceived it when I was teaching Shakespeare, to try to put the play before my students as I supposed it must have appeared before its first audience. And Shylock was anything but a sympathetic figure. He was a comic villain who got what he deserved. So it would, I thought, simply be nice to take this reviled Jew and show a different possibility, and that's really all it is. I had no intention of critiquing Shakespeare.
Well, the pound of flesh is not his idea in your story.
That's correct. It's not.
So, I can understand why this reviewer thought that you
Well, yes, I dare say, but you know, reviewers say all kinds of weird things.
Oh, but it's their story, isn't it? I mean,
But as we agree, they can say what they like. Yeah.
before we move on to the second story, the second novella in the collection, which is actually the title story, The Bacon Fancier, I'd like to talk for a moment about what you just told me, and that is that The Bacon Fancier is not the original title of the collection.
Right.
Why don't you tell us a little about
The book was
that?
first published in London in, I think it was 1997, and it was called Op Non Sit. I thought that Op Non Sit was a really clever title, and so, to his sorrow, did my publisher. It was not a clever title. It was clever to me, but it wasn't. You know, I just, one of the things about this novel is that it alludes to works that are never named. And so Shylock isn't named, The Merchant of Venice isn't named, in the next story Coleridge isn't named, I've forgotten the name of the poem.
Kubla Khan.
Kubla Khan isn't named, and so on. So Op Non Sit seemed to be, you know, really terrific title. Then it was published here a year later, but my American publishers said we simply cannot call it Op Non Sit. And in fact, an English reviewer who reviewed it for the London Jewish Chronicle said that anyone who calls a work of fiction Op Non Sit should be put into the stocks and flogged with James Joyce's underwear. So anyway, so we decided upon The Bacon Fancier, and in England, I happened to have brought with me the English paperback edition. When they brought out the paperback edition the year after, they decided that The Bacon Fancier was a better title for it too. So that's how it comes about. But the Op Non Sit does indicate something of what binds the four stories together. The fact is that there are works alluded to that are not mentioned, works and persons for that matter.
So here we also have a first-person narration. He's called Benjamin, our narrator. And this is a memoir told in the aftermath of the death of his longtime lover by the name of Queenie. He never married her because she was not Jewish. They had many children, none of them survived. Again, this is a tale of an outsider. She is called by the neighbors the Jew's whore. And as you mentioned earlier, this too is a tale of deformity because the narrator is missing an eye, wears a mechanical eye, I guess. Benjamin is an admirer of Francis Bacon, hence the title.
Also, the fact that he's married to not married to, living with a nun.
Right.
He fancies Bacon in another sense as well.
Right, exactly. He too was born in the ghetto in Venice, but once orphaned, he establishes himself as an instrument maker in England, having been trained by a famous instrument maker in Venice who gives him, upon his deathbed, his secret formula for varnish. And so he goes to England. We're in the 16th century and... 18th century, thank you. And then, give me just one moment. There's something here that I wanted to refer to. So I always think that if I use these nice little index tabs, it's going to help me. But I think it slows me down sometimes. Yes. I was bereft an adult, but once more an orphan. A cousin of my mother's, with whom over the years I had kept in sporadic contact, had urged me often to join him in London. In England, he said, a Jew could breathe free. There were a few restrictions. I could not complete a university degree, to be sure, or become a member of parliament. But apart from that, I could ply my trade unfettered. England was a musical nation, a host to Handel and the infant Mozart. And so he sees a modest degree of freedom and opportunity, and he goes to England. Eventually, he finds his way to the town of Porlock. Now, I would have never known of the town had it not been for this episode in Coleridge's life that he wrote about, the poet Coleridge, because he said that it was there that he came up with the poem Kubla Khan. And this is an episode which you evoke. So, you know, what I thought was marvelous was that now we have this Jewish protagonist, the proverbial outsider, who serves as a catalyst for one of the greatest English poems. How did this particular association come to you? I wonder, is there a story there?
Sort of. My wife and I were driving around in Devon, and as is her wont, she suddenly said, "Oh, look at that!" And I feel as I'm going to crash into something. But no, she was pointing to a road sign, and the road sign pointed to a little, the village of Nether Stowey. My wife is herself has a doctorate in English literature, and the Romantic period is her period, and she knows all about Coleridge, and lo, Coleridge, she said, that's where Coleridge wrote Kubla Khan. Why don't we go and have some tea? Take a look. And so we did. And we did. We had a nice, you know, one of those great English cream teas. And while we were doing so, I said, you know, what if the chap who interrupted Coleridge, as he claims, while he was writing this great poem, what if it were a Jew? What if the man from Porlock were a Jew?
I'm sorry for interrupting. Why would that occur to you?
Because I'm always astonished by the presence of Jews in places where I wouldn't expect them to be. You know, there is no reason in the world why I should find it more unlikely or stranger that a man from a shtetl in Poland or Russia should be in Tierra del Fuego than a Scottish Presbyterian. But somehow or other, a presence of a Jew in such a place just strikes me as odd, and it tickles my fancy. And so I thought that this man from Porlock, what if he were a Jew? Then I should think what kind of a Jew he was and how did he get there? And then, of course, I wanted to make some kind of a bridge between the two stories, and so, of course, he was born in Venice. Just as his violin, one of his violins turns up in the next story. I don't know whether you noticed that, but
no.
The gypsies who were playing.
Violin.
Yes, it's he said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Little games one plays with oneself, you know. Innocent, harmless.
Puzzle gets put together. Well, Benjamin, I think he's a very sympathetic character in many ways. He's a man he's a human being with flaws, and in general is fairly honorable, but not above betraying this woman that he's loved and lived with for many years for a chance at grabbing at posterity, because the opportunity presents itself. He may be able to marry a Jewish girl who could give him Jewish children. And he tries, but he fails, and he fails. He fails because of his mechanical eye.
In a horrible way.
In a horrible way. But he's not, you know, he mentions at one point that he's really not happy with the degree of his Jewishness. And it struck me that he was striking a modern note, and he was saying what many of us might perhaps say. He says, I have not lived my life as a Jew, not really, not here in Porlock. There is a mezuzah on my door, of course, but I do not observe the holidays, not even the days of all. All these pass me by. Candles are alight on my table of a Friday night, and of a Saturday I do no work, which is odd if he doesn't observe, you know, the days of awe. It's kind of, to my mind, a kind of a contradiction, but maybe not. Still, I eat what I eat, although before Queenie, never pork, never shellfish, never deliberately a mixing of milk and meat. And since Queenie, well, as I have said, I found it prudent not to inquire. Of course, as the year rolls round, I say Kaddish for my parents. That, at least, I have always done. Any comments? I like that very much.
Is there any question?
No.
Well, I suppose I'm moved by two things there. One is I've often considered what was the possibility for the maintenance of religious orthodoxy in those who, in this country, for example, in the mid 19th century, the late 19th century, travelled all by themselves, selling needles and cotton and whatever it was in the Wild West and so on. I mean, there was no shocher to be found. There was no shul. There was nothing. How did they live? Well, things must have gotten pretty thin in that orthodoxy that they once had, but they maintained certain things. After all, the conversos in Spain, in all kinds of ways, maintained certain Jewish things in spite of the outward practice of Christianity, of Catholicism. So my character does keep certain things. And as for Kaddish, well, I suppose that's a little personal. I come from a family of ancestor worshippers, and I was very young when my father died, and his brother, who sort of took over, made of Kaddish the one thing you cannot not say it. So that's one of the things I gave to my character.
Well, I think many of us could relate to that. There's, what struck me, and again, I may be completely off base here, but there is a 15th century English morality play in which every man, you must be familiar with it, every man is called by death, but he can't persuade any of his friends, not beauty, not kindred, not worldly goods, to accompany him, except charitable deeds. And I was struck by the idea that only Ben's charitable action towards Queenie, because he meets her when he rescues her, and only that charitable deed towards Queenie has consequences in his life. And so, I thought that perhaps it would be right to call Benjamin a kind of everyman in Jewish guise. What do you think?
I like the thought, certainly.
Like it?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, thought I'd share that.
Jedermann, we'll call him.
Jedermann, right. All right, in the next story, which is called The Crossing, David Gladstone, born to, quote, a consumptive mother and a gin-sodden father, is adopted by a wealthy Jewish couple by the name of Gladstone in a stroke of luck reminiscent, I guess, of the heroes of Dickens. He undertakes a voyage to New York for his education in good 19th century tradition, a rite of passage, pun intended, during which he encounters the gentleman's anti-Semitism. One of the characters that he meets is this American military hero, and that has quotes around it because he's not. He was created as a hero in an attempt really by the American government to exercise some sort of damage control during the Civil War.
Gallant Jack, his name is.
Gallant Jack. And I was wondering whether you were thinking of anyone in particular in these days in which, well, never mind. I was just wondering whether you were thinking of anyone in particular.
I can answer honestly, no. But I also think that is the way things work. We have a recent example. You're quite right. I hadn't thought of that. Sort of after the event, imitating Gallant Jack in a way. Okay. But no, Gallant Jack was drunk on the day that he led the charge. And he led a charge swaying in the saddle. He had no idea where he was going. The horse took off, and his troop followed. And they went into a Confederate ambush, and they were cut to pieces. And Gallant Jack was the only survivor. And a New York City newspaper reporter who was watching the charge from a distance thought he was seeing an American version of the Charge of the Light Brigade. And he wrote back to his newspaper accordingly. And so now the military decided that it was probably a better idea to promote this man and give him a medal than to hang him as a coward. And so they did. And I think that sort of thing, I really think that sort of thing happens. In any case, it amused me to make it happen. And so I did.
No, it struck me as real too. We meet a group of entertainers who pose as gypsies. That's where the violin comes in.
Right.
And they are accused of theft falsely because in reality it's this Gallant Jack who is, I guess, a kleptomaniac of sorts.
A thief, I think, is the
right word.
the word we want.
Most prominently, however, he meets Oscar Wilde. And in this encounter, we find the germ of the importance of being earnest, because our protagonist here, David Gladstone, who was actually as an infant abandoned in a railway station, and that, of course, is the story behind the importance of being earnest. So, you know, the book is full of these things, and as I told you earlier, I know that I have only found some of them, and perhaps you will tell us before we leave off. Perhaps you'll tell us some of the others.
Don't count on it.
So in this story, we have the Jew, David Gladstone, the homosexual Oscar Wilde, and the gypsy, albeit not real gypsies, come together as outsiders. End of 19th century. And this threesome seems to kind of presage the extermination of these groups by Hitler. Is that how you saw it? Were you consciously
The extermination
doing
of
this?
these groups by whom?
By Hitler.
No.
You did not.
I mean, now you tell me about it. But no, I didn't.
You didn't see that.
I really didn't.
Okay.
But
I thought that there was
Hey,
some
that's
sort of
good.
an allusion to the fate of European Jewry, and I'll tell you why. Because the crossing can be seen as a sort of escape. In other words, so many people who were fortunate enough to come to America, because what other shores would provide this sort of refuge for Jews?
that's true enough. And it's also true that the year was 1882, and the Statue of Liberty is in pieces, but already in New York. One of the arm with the thing is in Madison Square, and of course we know Emma Lazarus wrote a poem for that Statue of Liberty at this time. So these associations are really not wild by any means, and I respect what you're saying. I must admit, in honesty, though, that I didn't see that, and I didn't actually intend it. I am very conscious, or I am conscious perhaps more as someone who was brought up in England than most Americans, American Jews are likely to be, of that social distance where even when one is dealing with people whom one regards as one's friends, there is a kind of barrier. And there is, moreover, a kind of social contract. We will not say to you, to your face, what it is that we actually think about you. And there is a kind of sensitivity to that, which David Gladstone certainly encounters. Oscar Wilde claims that the Irish are in a similar state. And it is certainly true that the downtrodden of this earth, my group of pseudo-gypsies, fit that category. But oddly enough, I never thought of that. And for me, the pun on the crossing had to do with the cross, you know, not...
Oh, I see. I see.
But still, you know, it's always interesting to hear. I suppose if I'm ever interviewed again about this story and I'm asked a question, I shall claim that that's what I intended. Because I think it's very clever.
I would be honored. The Major General, Gallant Jack that is an American the American version of the anti-Semite, and he is much more direct and blatant and explicit, of course, than all of the English people on board. So I thought, you know, along those lines, if America is a refuge for the Jew, is it, or is it a case of, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same?
Well, you know, I started off with the intention of indicating that America was different from all the rest. But by the time I got to the end of that story, and by the time I'd finished with Gallant Jack, I decided it's not really. And that's why the last words of the story are that he descended. I mean, he got off the boat, but he descended. It didn't go up. It was not an aliyah of any sort, but that's the opposite. So yes, my understanding was that it makes no difference where you are.
Right.
Not a very upbeat point of view, but nevertheless one which I've developed over the years.
Yeah, and I managed to laugh uproariously, you know, as I was reading.
That's what you have to do.
Yeah, yeah. And so we come to the last novella, which is called The Affair. Having crossed the ocean, we find ourselves in post-World War II New York. Bruno has written a play about Dreyfus.
No, he hasn't.
No?
No. Bruno has been gathering notes to write a study of Dreyfus.
A study of Dreyfus,
It is,
sorry.
The play has been
Correct.
written by his friend.
Correct. Well, a musical comedy. His friend plagiarizes it.
No, he was not
writes
writing a musical comedy. He was yes, the friend
the
writes
friend,
a musical comedy.
Correct.
But he thinks he plagiarizes it. That's what he gave his materials to this friend who is a publisher, although not a publisher of books, in the hope that he would get some advice, you know, a sample chapter of the biography of Dreyfus and so on and so forth. And his friend, meanwhile, writes this musical
comedy.
Dreyfus the Musical.
Right.
And he's appalled. He thinks he's stolen it from him. But as his friend points out, David Greenglass points out, is it not David Greenglass?
I don't think it's Greenglass. No.
No, it's Greenglass, but is it not David?
Well,
Well, we can find out. We've got the books here. Anyway, as he points out, this is...
it is Greenglass.
There are all kinds of books on Dreyfus. Why should you think I've taken it from you? Let me show you my bibliography, you know, and so on and so forth. I think his name is Greenglass.
It is Greenglass, you're right.
But I don't know what his first name is. Duncan.
Duncan.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect. Duncan Greenglass. I love those juxtapositions.
So he sees it, though, as a sort of double betrayal, right? Because it's a betrayal of himself, and it's also a cheapening of...
Absolutely. He finds it appalling that anyone could even dream of.
So Bruno, once again, is in love with a non-Jewish woman by the name of Olga, and he refuses to marry her because he can't have Jewish children with her. Right?
I don't know whether marriage is ever in his mind at all.
I'm sorry?
I don't know whether marriage is ever in his mind at all.
Well, it is in hers.
Maybe, yes, in hers it is. But whether with regard, I don't know whether...
But he sees no future with her, because a future has to be defined that way.
Okay.
So I thought, in any event, the title alludes both to the Dreyfus affair and to his.
It does.
And to his private affair.
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's quite right.
And both end up in a kind of suspension without any real resolution, it seems to me.
Well,
I mean, Dreyfus is not really vindicated, but at the same time, our hero here, Olga comes back to him, and things just pick up where they left off with no change. I mean, there's nothing happens, nothing.
Sort of. I mean, she does come back to him, and he's lying on the bed, and she comes over to him, and she's just had a shower, and she takes off her towel, but she's wearing this cross still. And the last words are, the cross, he said, will have to go.
Right. Right.
But to give you, may I read just a little bit of Dreyfus the musical? Some of you may remember.
Sing it.
Well, if only I could. If you were the only girl in the world, that. Okay, this is a love duet between Schmetterling and Dreyfus. If you were the only Jew in the world, and you were the only Goy, no adverse conditions would stand in our way. We could test the limits of erotic play. A vessel of pleasure, we'd be the crew. I tremble to think, who boy? First we'd snuggle up and then we'd kitschy-coo. Then before we knew it, we'd begin to screw. If you were the only Jew in the world, and you were the only Goy. Anyway, that's the, you can see why he's a little offended by what is being done to Dreyfus in the musical.
But I see the satire on show business, and I see a comment on betrayal. But I seem to have somehow lost the Jewish thread. And can you help me out?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know why you've lost it.
Because I see the four novellas as representing it, as I said earlier, kind of an overview and showing us how the Jew manages to survive in what is basically a hostile environment.
Right. I think that in the course of the four stories, he's gaining in strength and power in his ability to do that. But if you pursue a different thread, let us remember, after all, that this is not a treatise. 4 chapters of a treatise. These are 4 fictions, and that they are fictions. The story is really what is most important. I think that you could follow a different thread and see, as in the relationship of Benjamin Cardozo to Queenie, a variation in the relationship of Bruno to Olga. This is another one of those mixed relationships which produces its own problems. I think the difficulty, perhaps the difficulty for you, I don't know, is that Bruno's not a very nice guy.
Right.
I specialize in producing people who are not nice people. I don't know why that is. I'm such a nice guy myself, but I do. And if you don't like that, if a reader would like his hero to be heroic, or at any rate, at very least, you've got to sympathise with this fellow. I think what I would strive to do is to have you recognise in this man a common humanity that is common with your own, in some sense, because even the best of us is not always good. So this is not a nice guy, but he's a human being just the same.
But I would want him to be somehow a reflective human being, because I think that, you see, what I liked about Benjamin is that he is. And so is Shylock. And so is David Gladstone with his diaries.
Yeah.
So this is the only one who, I can't figure him out.
Well, I don't know, maybe you could see in his enthusiasm for Dreyfus and Dreyfus' story and Dreyfus' tragedy, perhaps you could see in it something of Cardozo's enthusiasm for Bacon, Francis Bacon. No, these are people who throw in their lots with figures outside of themselves whom they, in some sense, admire. But I can't help you to an enjoyment that you don't feel.
Okay. So, of the 2 blatantly hateful episodes in 20th century Jewish history, you allude to one, to the Dreyfus affair. You don't really mention, there are 2 questions here. You don't really mention the Holocaust, and I want to know why. But in a similar vein, you don't mention the State of Israel. Now, in my reading of these 4 novellas, or if that reading has any validity, I would have expected a story set in Israel at some point. And so I wondered if you considered it.
Well, I suppose by the time I'd done those 4, I'd done what I thought was enough. But that's a flip answer. I think the real answer is that I have dealt with these other things in other writings, and I really don't want. First of all, I don't want to be identified as a Holocaust novelist. You know, he writes about the Holocaust. I also wouldn't want really. I mean, if I had my absolute druthers, be identified as a Jewish novelist, other than a novelist who happens to be a Jew. On the other hand, I don't seem to be able to write in any way other than in that stereotype, the Jewish novelist. That's what I do. But I don't want to repeat myself. And in The Prince of West End Avenue, I touch on the Holocaust, and Israel appears in that, at least it does as Palestine. In Clerical Errors, my character goes to Israel and has certain experiences there. In the novel I've just completed, one of the principal characters actually is one of those who relieves Bergen-Belsen toward the end of the Second World War. So I do these things, but I can't do these things everywhere and always. And,
no, I don't mean this critically by any means. I was just I just felt that I wanted validation for what I thought I saw in these novellas, and that is that thread of Jewish history. And so I suppose that to my mind in the 20th century, you can't talk about Jewish history without talking about A, the Holocaust, and B, the state of Israel.
What you're saying is, I'm sure, valid. But and now I'm beginning to remember some of the things I thought through and my notions of structure. One of the things that it was directional. We went from Italy to England to America and to across the ocean, and the ocean actually, and then finally we're in America. To have gone to Israel would have been to return, to turn back again, and that would have certainly spoiled that structural device, which at the time threads that were to be found in one way or another, woven through all of the stories. At least I tried to do that. I think the novel about Israel or the story about Israel has to wait for some other occasion. Well, it may. I don't know. It may. It's not in mind, certainly.
Your heroes are all men.
That's what it means to be a hero. Well, it's not, a hero, heroine. I mean, Okay, go ahead. Sorry, that was unforgivable in this age, and I apologize. Yes.
And you know that when you mention women, it's always in the context of breeding Jewish children.
Of doing what?
Of breeding Jewish children.
Is that true?
I think so.
Well, I didn't know that. I really didn't know that, and I shall have to go through my stories again, looking for that. But okay, I don't know what to make of it. I know that I'm speaking now very frankly. I find it very difficult to produce convincing women. It's just very hard for me, and so women, by and large, are always ancillary figures in my writing. Although I must say, I think that I just alluded before to the book that I just finished, I think that the women, if they are not the heroes exactly, nevertheless are real people. I think so. But you're telling me something even far worse than that. You're telling me that I regard women as merely readers, and certainly not consciously. It seems to have slipped through unconsciously.
Those are the contexts in which they appear. But,
wow.
Well, tell us, please, if you would, briefly about your other books and what's in store for your readers.
Well, my other books, that's history. And the first of them was The Prince of West End Avenue, and it was followed by Craven Images, and then by The Bacon Fancier, then by Clerical Errors. And now I've just completed and and I believe is now sitting on my English publisher's desk, a new novel. And it's a novel about biography, really, and about the impossibility of ever knowing the truth about anyone, and how not only can you not rely on what people tell you about X, you can't believe what X tells you about himself, nor does it appear you can even rely on the documents. And it seems that whoever is telling a story, a life, or something or other, picks and chooses those items which fit the pattern that he... Anyway, I have got a narrator who is a novelist, and a biographer who is an American academic, and the subject of the biography who is the grand old man of British art. And these three come together in the course of the novel. But, you know, without the pages in front of you, what can I tell you? That would make any sense at all.
Does it have a working title you can share?
It has several working titles. It is biography, a novel. It is life drawings. It is getting a life. And it has one other that I've forgotten. But they're all written out. It doesn't matter that I've forgotten it tonight.
Not Obnonsit.
No, definitely not Obnonsit. No, I've learned my lesson there. And so is my publisher. Were you about to say something?
Well, I wanted to ask you a question. There is a slight discrepancy. I think it's in the first story.
Wow.
Which I'm sensitive to.
Yes.
And that was that person, man, was born on Rosh Hashanah and circumcised on Yom Kippur.
Yes.
That's not quite right.
It is quite right. It happened to me.
Well, isn't it?
I am living proof.
Yeah, it can be done, but
It was done. In fact, I was told, so important was this event, that that Orthodox Jews who were in walking distance flocked to be present at this extraordinary occasion.
not being born 2 days after the first day of Rosh Hashanah.
Well, I can't.
And we had the personal thing that our firstborn was circumcised on Yom Kippur.
Yes.
So we know what we went through.
So he was born on when?
2 days after the first day. In other words,
2 days after. No.
yeah. Well, the first day
It's 10
in
days.
Israel there would be only 1 day. That's why I'm saying
Yeah.
it that way. But it's the day after the second day of Rosh Hashanah is
Well,
was circumcised on Yom Kippur.
I Well, I can't argue with you at all. I can only offer this, what now appears to be merely anecdotal evidence that was drummed into me as a boy, and so that I knew how important I was, that they came flocking from all over for this occasion. In any event, because I knew of the truth of it, or now we're going to put truth in quotation marks, because it's a question we have to take to the rabbis. Now that we know the truth of it, you may very well have found a flaw, but it was an honest mistake. I was merely granting this character what I believed to be true of myself. But I certainly will pursue this one further. I definitely need to know. You know, I built up a whole imagining on that. I thought that in fact, I probably was the Messiah. You know, my name being Abraham, which I was told meant in Hebrew, father of a multitude, which in fact I turned out to be. And to be born on Rosh Hashanah and have a bris on Yom Kippur, it seemed virtually certain. And I thought that the time would come when I would reveal myself to the world. But the time is not yet. Well, there you are. I've told you more than I should have. But thank you for that. It gives me something to look up anyway. Look into.
Yes.
Benjamin Cardozo in American legal jurisprudence is a very venerated character.
Yes.
Is there some flaw that you know about Ben Cardozo that we don't?
Nothing
This is
whatever.
why he's so deformed?
Nothing whatever. It had nothing whatever to do with him. Cardozo was a convenient name that belonged to Sephardic Jews in Italy. Whether I chose Benjamin Cardozo because the two names, they were already somewhere in my head, or simply it's just coincidence, I really couldn't say, but it has nothing whatever to do with Benjamin. Not the jurist, no.
Yes.
The fourth novella, when there was the ability to have the freedom to think in America the way you wanted to, seemed to be juxtaposition to the character that was the least of the Jewish thread, and yet his inability, if he wanted to be Jewish and to create and to have children, he didn't succeed in that part. So it was like, that's the part that I found disconnected from me.
I have to first of all confess that I don't remember that this character wanted to have children.
Well,
That Olga wanted to have children, that's true. But that he wanted to have children, I don't believe I even touched on it.
Okay, then I assumed.
And perhaps I misled you,
Yeah.
but I that was my
I
reading of it.
assumed that it was the ability of creation and sex and creation to promote, and so I got stumbled with the disconnect that he had opportunity, but it wasn't taken. He had the opportunity to be Jewish and to live a Jewish life, and yet somehow it.
He's your ordinary New York Jew. In fact, I mean, the non-religious New York Jew.
That's what I'm saying. And in a time where all the other people had to survive to practice their Judaism, he didn't have to have
That's
that
right.
happen to him.
Right, exactly right. That is that's the great freedom of being in America. But at the same time, there is hovering, nevertheless, over it the fact of Dreyfus, and it's still splitting France. This business of Dreyfus is not over yet. So it is something that is part of the modern world, even so. But his interest in it is, he is a Jew. That's what he is.
But he
doesn't.
Have to survive, though.
He didn't have to do those things. No, he didn't. He's trying to survive in the world as the rest of us are trying to survive. He wants a job.
I think you may be pointing to a kind of an irony.
That's what I feel.
That is a real irony outside of Alan's work.
That what?
The irony that here, where we do have the freedom to practice, we do not always.
Right.
I
suppose that's true.
We fail, but I see him as a rather frustrated individual on many levels. He has, this sense of injustice, and I think that this is perhaps why Dreyfus and the Dreyfus affair means so much to him. He internalizes it.
Well, let us not forget what his profession is. It's not insignificant, I think, that he is a supernumerary. That's what he is. Mm-hmm. Well, he can be a supernumerary, as he is, in the small opera houses of Greenwich Village, and you can be a supernumerary in other ways as well. Mm-hmm. And I think I thought of him as a supernumerary, who had opportunity. Suddenly he was getting speaking parts.
That's right.
But he couldn't sing. And so, as Olga tells him, in opera, I understand you're supposed to be able to sing. Don't get above yourself. But he had a marvelous performance playing Frosch in Die Fledermaus, and all of a sudden it looked as if he was heading for Broadway. Well, he's not. He is a supernumerary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sir.
Could I get away from your writing for a second and ask something about yourself? What would happen if you tried to write a book that did not specifically have a Jewish theme?
I've tried. what happens is it suddenly goes in that direction. I don't know why it is. I mean, the one that I just completed, I certainly started off hoping to escape from that, but I can't escape from it, and so perhaps I shouldn't try. I don't know, my sensibility, my thoughts, my plot details, they all seem to tend in a single direction. So go with the flow.
And could I ask you another?
Yes, certainly.
Again, I mean, you're a real author. I mean,
Well, that's very kind of you.
Opinions, you have experience, and just like Philip Roth and Saul Bellow, they really detest being thought of as a Jewish novelist. Of course, they write on Jewish themes. Can you give me your opinion of them? When you read their novels and you compare them with your own, how do you?
I feel this big. That's how I feel.
Not really, because you're obviously a truly competent writer.
Well, that's very kind of you. What do I think about them as Jewish writers?
In general.
Well, I think generally recognized that the 20th century has been the century of the American Jewish writer. I mean, those have been the major writers. Those have been the writers. So that I think that it's probably true that even non-Jewish American writers in the 20th century were writing in the manner of such models as Roth and Bellow. Although don't ask me to give you examples, I don't think I could. But I wouldn't be at all surprised. I think that it is a kind of genre, the American Jewish novel, an American Jewish fiction, and they write in that genre, and so do I.
Against your will?
Well, against my will only because I just don't want to be categorized. I just don't like the categorization. But if it's a fair categorization and it's an honest one, I don't know how to escape it. I mean, it's relatively certain that the Jewish Chronicle is going to review me. Why? They don't review everybody. And they're going to do that because they regard me as a Jewish writer too.
Do you have
an Anglo-Jewish writer. I beg your pardon?
Do you have an extensive Jewish background like Saul Bellow?
Not really. I had Orthodox grandparents. I had parents who regarded themselves as free thinkers, which was a bit of a joke too, because they were neither free nor thinkers. Yes.
I once spoke to the late Bernard Malibor.
Yes.
And I was casually, talking about, his work, and I refer to him as a Jewish novelist. I mean, as one of the Jewish novelists, and he was very offended. He protested up and down that this was a demeaning description of what he did. Have you ever felt that? Obviously, you don't feel that sense of being demeaned by being described as a Jewish novelist.
No, I don't really feel that, but I do object. I mean, I don't object much anymore. Why should it's pointless? But I have objected to that simply to that category. But on the other hand, we need to pigeonhole things. It would seem, we have Southern American writers, for example, and we have Canadian writers. We do what we can to put people into categories where we think we've grasped them and can understand them.
By the same token, would you say that you are British? I mean, do you think that those have equal weight?
I really think at this point that probably the greatest weight is now in the United States. But I was fairly recently, for 5 years, again in England, and I began to feel an attachment to those roots. I know that there I'm regarded as an Anglo-Jewish writer.
Would you say that your outlook, because our outlook is often shaped quite early in life actually, would you say that your outlook is more British or more American at this point?
I don't know whether I'm probably more American, but I don't know whether I would answer it that way, really. If those are the only choices I've got, I guess I'd say American. But I think that that as a European Jew, perhaps more than any American Jews that I've come across, I feel myself to be an outsider. I think that that's a great advantage for a writer. I feel myself to be an outsider in England, and I feel myself to be an outsider here. I mean, there are certain things. How can I claim myself to be an American, which I have been, I might add. I've been here since 1952. When people say to me, "Oh, you're from England, aren't you?" Or something like that. Or I mean, I know myself. I don't know the feel of a baseball hitting a leather glove. You know, these things which everyone. I know a cricket ball and a cricket bat. So I'm an outsider here too, and I just think the outside's a good place to be. I like to look on, human comedy. Well.
Any other questions, comments? Oh. Well, you told us about your future and your future work, so I'd like to just take a moment to talk about ours here at the Jewish Literary Exchange, the season that's shaping up. Our next guest will be Jonathan Rosen. Following Jonathan Rosen, Jonathan Wilson, Benny Kirschenbaum, Anne Burstyn, who is the former wife of critic Alfred Kaysen, and finally Frances Sherwood, again with a story about the golem, which seems to have this fascination. Last year, of course, we met with Thane Rosenbaum, who is fascinated by the golem. Do you understand this fascination?
I don't know. I mean, I think it is the idea of a weak people finding their salvation in some supernatural creature that will defend them against a terrifying world.
Do we particularly need it now?
Well, I guess we do. I guess we always have, and I think that's the appeal. I mean, without wanting to get into it, it's now getting late, but. I don't think the Jews are out of peril by any means. It would be good to have a golem who could help us out.
On March 11th, we also have a special program which was, I think, left out by mistake from the last catalog, will appear in the spring catalog. Or maybe it was there, I'm not sure. But this special program is a panel discussion of very, very young Jewish writers called The Lost Tribe. So look for it. And, I'd love to see as many of you as can join us. Alan Eisler, thank you so very, very much.
Thank you very much.
It was really an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.